Long before, modern freeze-dried rations and insulated gear, men and women operating in the Yukon's frozen interior faced a simple, brutal equation: adapt to what the land offered or die. The temperature could plunge to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit, the rivers locked under meters of ice, and the nearest settlement days away by dog sled. In this world, survival wasn't a hobby or a weekend skill set. It was a daily negotiation with one of the most unforgiving landscapes on Earth, and at the centre of that negotiation was something most modern people would honestly hesitate to put in their mouths: raw frozen fish, sliced thin and eaten in the open air, with nothing but rendered fat and grit to wash it down. Broad whitefish was the cornerstone of winter survival in the Yukon basin, and the trappers and indigenous peoples who understood this had, really, unlocked one of the Arctic's most reliable caloric keys. As early winter set in and the rivers began to seal over, gill nets were carefully fed beneath the ice, a process requiring intimate knowledge of current lines, freeze patterns, and fish behavior. A skilled net setter could pull upward of 100 fish in a single day during peak runs, and each one was cleaned quickly in the bitter cold before being laid out to freeze hard as stone. Once frozen, a whitefish could be stored in an outdoor cache for months, naturally preserved by temperatures that no modern freezer could, replicate in terms of consistency or depth. What seemed shocking from a contemporary perspective was, in practice, a sophisticated nutritional strategy. Eating the fish raw preserved enzymes and fat-soluble vitamins, particularly vitamin C and vitamin D, that cooking would, unfortunately, degrade or destroy. In a landscape with almost no plant life available through the winter months, this mattered enormously. Scurvy and nutritional deficiency were very real threats, and frozen raw fish quietly defended against both. The fish was typically shaved or sliced while still solid, producing translucent ribbons of flesh that melted slightly on the tongue, a practice strikingly similar to the Siberian tradition of stroganina, carried independently across thousands of miles of shared Arctic instinct. Protein alone cannot sustain a human body in extreme cold, and the trappers knew this viscerally. Without sufficient dietary fat, the body begins to cannibalize itself, a condition sometimes called rabbit starvation, a cruel irony in a land full of game. Seal oil, rendered bear fat, or whatever grease could be sourced, was paired with frozen fish at nearly every meal, creating a caloric density that allowed the body to generate and retain heat through nights that seemed to have no end. Dipping a frozen slice of whitefish into seal oil wasn't a cultural curiosity. It was precision nutrition, developed over generations of hard-won experience. Storing food in the Arctic required as much skill as acquiring it. Outdoor caches, small elevated platforms or rock-sheltered stores, kept provisions frozen, protected from wolves and wolverines, and accessible even after heavy snowfall buried the landscape. The sub-zero air did the work that refrigeration does today, and the trappers trusted it completely. There was a rhythm to this system: fish harvested in early winter, cached by mid-season, drawn down through February and March, when mobility was limited and hunting difficult. It was a supply chain managed entirely through environmental knowledge and seasonal reading. No spreadsheets, no logistics software, just a lifetime of paying close attention. The Yukon trappers were not performing survival for an audience. They were living a fieldcraft so deeply integrated into daily life that the line between technique and instinct had long since blurred. What they practiced: reading ice, managing fat intake, preserving food without technology, Understanding the nutritional value of raw animal products represents a body of knowledge that modern bushcraft and preparedness communities are only beginning to rediscover. In a world increasingly dependent on supply chains and processed food, the image of a trapper kneeling beside a frozen cache, slicing whitefish in the blue half-light of an Arctic afternoon, carries a quiet and powerful message. The land will sustain you, but only if you understand it deeply enough to ask the right questions of it. Resilience has never been about toughness for its own sake. It has always been about knowledge, specific, practiced, transferable knowledge that turns a hostile environment into a livable one. The trappers of the Yukon didn't just endure winter. They read it, worked with it, and built a survival system so effective that its core principles remain valid today. That is the spirit of Fieldcraft Chronicles, not nostalgia, but education with real-world weight. If this episode opened your eyes to the depth of traditional cold-weather fieldcraft, share it with someone who values self-reliance, history, and the kind of knowledge that actually matters when things get hard. Subscribe to Fieldcraft Chronicles so you never miss an episode, because the old ways aren't gone. They're waiting to be remembered.